Using the memory sphere, Ethan learned that Baron Kargas had ordered Wilden to cripple the youngest lord no matter what. The Baron had also stolen and handed the Duke's breathing technique to Wilden. He called out to Hans to make a report, and Hans informed him that the youngest Duke had taken care of them all, and they had taken back all the illegally taken money. The leader had been taken care of as well. Hans asked Ethan if he needed the leader, to which Ethan responded that he did not need him as there was enough evidence in the memory sphere. Ethan thought of the collateral family who had stolen the vision of the main family and tried to kill the direct line of the family. As well as drugs, gamblings, murder, and illegal business, there was more than enough evidence to get them. However, now was not the time. He thought that, with his current strength, it would be tough to deal with the Baron's knights. He was going to use all the mana gathered from resonance to sow the seeds of fire, and he would gather mana to increase the sowing. Right now, it was only his wrist, and after spending the seeds of fire on his heart and finishing the basics of cycling, he would be able to immediately deal with Baron Kargas. Ethan called out to Hans and ordered him to store the memory sphere somewhere safe, informing him that the other spoils that came with it were his to keep. He warned him that, if he wanted to live, he had to forget the contents of the memory sphere. Upon hearing this, Hans pretended to have forgotten everything that had happened. In the Baron's household, the Baron was seen to be infuriated that Ethan had broken his funding line, and was thinking of assassinating Ethan. However, he couldn't do it because if he died on the Baron's territory, he wouldn't be able to avoid the responsibility and, if things got big, all of the other collaterals could end up being his responsibility. He decided to not make things bigger right now, and that in 2 months' time there would be an elder meeting where a chance might occur. The butler came in and told the Baron that Hans had sent them a message. The Baron grabbed the letter and read it, to which the butler said that the price looked right from what he had requested and asked him what they should do. The Baron ripped the piece apart and yelled, "That crazy bastard wants 100 gold. He didn't have a choice but to give Hans the amount of gold he was asking for, and told his butler to check properly if Hans was trying to trick him. 3 days later, on a sunny day, workers were seen renovating the Arden's hunting mansion. Ethan was successful in filling up half of the mana holes in his arms. Ethan said the construction was almost over, and Hans replied to him, saying that the Red Scorpion had more money than they had thought, so they had used more of it. Ethan told Hans to make sure to keep plenty for themselves. Ethan entered the dining room and saw his sister in a beautiful clothing, praising her. Ethan thought to himself that Hans was pretty good, and now it felt like a proper Duke family. Ethan said he would make sure that his sister only wore and ate good things from now on. While they were eating, Ethan asked his younger brother how his wounds were, to which Myers replied that he was fine and all his minor wounds would be fine by next week. Ethan was grateful to hear it. He then asked his siblings if they knew about the traditional family ceremony held in the mansion, to which one of his siblings asked him if there was such a thing. Ethan told Hans that they would be going hunting in the Pushkas mountain, and Hans replied that he would bring servants and prepare everything immediately. However, Ethan told him there was no need for servants, only his siblings and Hans would be going out. 1 week later, at Pushkas mountain, the 4 of them went to the mountain. Hans was thinking that it had been a hellish week, with disgusting monsters that had ambushed them from the first day. He really thought he was going to die there. Without the Archduke, he would have died 10 times, and why would the Archduke intentionally approach monsters to train the youngest lord? After walking for a while, they had reached their destination, the Temple of Fire. A place that had been known for ages. One of the Arden ancestors had discovered it, and after that, it had been regularly visited for funeral rites and for the blessing of the fire spirits. Traditionally, the Ardens let children over 10 years old meet the fire spirits. The blessing of fire the spirit gives puts fire energy in their bodies to let them get used to fire. So, the ceremony of fire was a tradition everyone in the family had to go through so that they could use fire. Hans asked Ethan if it was okay for him to be there because the place looked pretty important, to which Ethan told him it was okay. When they reached the altar for the ceremony, Ethan informed Myers that they needed to offer tributes and dance once fire sparks started flying. After that, the spirits would gather and bless them. History had been completely different since 15 years ago, but before that, everything else had been the same as Ethan's past life. It had been over 100 years since the Arden family had contracted with the fire spirits, but what if the contract had been broken in this history? It would be unfortunate, but if that happened, they would have to give up the blessing. Ethan began to chant the ritual and the passage of fire opened, allowing the spirits to emerge. Myers' spirit had a middle rank affinity, while his sister had a salamander spirit, which was a low rank. Ethan pondered that, in his past life, he was a person who ruled fire. He shouted and asked who would bless him, and a huge spirit fireball came out of the altar. Ethan thought that it was bigger than Ignis from his previous life. The spirit spoke and said, "Blood of the Arden family, worship. Did you call for me?" Ethan replied, "Yes, I want your blessing, from you the fire monarch." Suddenly, Ethan found himself in his inner world. A bright red flame appeared and formed a human figure in front of him. The fire monarch Rorosha introduced himself and explained to Ethan that he was in his inner world where fire passed through. The fire monarch discovered that Ethan was trying to control his body, so Ethan apologized and explained that he thought it would be more efficient if they combined the monarch's power and his control. He thought that Rorosha was a cute name for the fire monarch. The fire monarch smirked and said that Ethan was a fun guy, and gave him a chance. If Ethan managed to control even a little of the fire monarch's power, he would abide by Ethan's request and bestow him with the greatest blessing. The fire monarch asked Ethan to show him his talent, and upon hearing this, Ethan was determined to give his all. Outside of Ethan's inner world, Myers and the Grand Duchess worriedly watched him float while surrounded by fire spirits. Myers was unsure of what was going on, but he was confident that his older brother would succeed. Meanwhile, Ethan was in a state of complete focus, remembering his past senses of ruling over fire as a transcendent and breathing the black fire. After much struggle, he successfully controlled a bit of fire from the monarch. He said to the fire monarch that he had won. The fire monarch replied, even though it was only a little bit of it. To think there would be a human who could control his power. Like he promised, he gave everything Ethan wanted. He successfully absorbed the fire monarch's power. The monarch asked him if he was satisfied, and Ethan said that he was. He then requested to bestow blessings to his siblings as well. The fire monarch granted his request. He called Ethan a child of fire and said that it was fun and that they would meet again. Ethan was reflecting on the strange fate of his siblings. He had improved his musculoskeletal system and cleansed his veins by over 90%, so much so that he was confident in claiming to have the greatest physique in the continent. It would take time for Myers and his sister to do the same, so he would have to control those fires while he waited. Hans was shocked at what he witnessed, unable to believe that he had seen the spirit monarch, something that was only heard of in legends. He reported a monstrous archduke being on his own, but now he had also received the blessing of the monarch for hours. He now knew why he had been brought there and he had to be sure which side he would stand with. Ethan then explained to his siblings that the blessing of fire changed bones, muscles, veins, and everything. Myers still couldn't believe that so much had changed, remarking on the incredible power of the fire monarch. Ethan thought that the blessing directly from the monarch was a much bigger profit than he had anticipated, thankful to have his memories from his past life. Suddenly, Myers asked Ethan if it was normal to get so hungry after getting blessed, to which Ethan replied in the affirmative. He suggested they leave and eat. In a resting place near the temple where they ate at, Ethan, Myers and Hans ventured outside. Myers commented on the amazement of having a cabin near the hunting ground, to which Hans replied that he was able to show his skill because of it. Myers asked Ethan where they were going, inquiring if there was still something to surprise them with. Ethan replied that he would show him something that would surprise him out of his mind. The three descended into the secret storage room, where Hans was surprised to see something precious in the storage. Ethan asked him if he knew what it was, to which Hans responded that it was the peacock's leather, something that young girls couldn't buy in the capital due to its rarity and high quality. He instructed Hans to find a trustworthy merchant to sell the products, and ordered them to take all the items because they were going down. The next day, the Duke family and Hans returned to the mansion. Ethan was at his desk when Hans called out to him, asking if he could come in. He informed Ethan that he had found a merchant group to sell the items to, and when Ethan asked which group, Hans told him it was a merchant group called Mises. Ethan was taken aback upon hearing Mises, and instructed Hans to meet them immediately, leaving him confused. Ethan entered the guest room and apologized for being late. The guest told him it was all right and thanked Ethan for worrying about him. The guest introduced himself as Michelin, the head of Mises. Ethan said he wanted the guest to reveal his real name because their transaction was based on trust. He mentioned that he had heard from his father, Marquis Bessus, that the guest had a tradition of going independent for a few years, likely to hide their identity and to train to trust. The guest said, "I think you're mistaken, prompting Ethan to inquire if he was mistaken about the realistic mask in the hidden escort knight. Upon hearing this, the guest was alarmed, thinking that it had been 3 years since he had secretly gone independent and had changed his voice so even the king wouldn't be able to identify him. Ethan thought to himself that he had heard it directly from him in his past life. The guest remarked on Ethan's incredible insight and reintroduced himself as Jaren Bessos. Ethan greeted him and said, "Hello, Jaren Bessos, head of a small family." Ethan then told him that what he was selling wouldn't be of any help to his experience and asked if he was interested in making potions. Jaren was surprised that Ethan knew about it. Ethan told him that some things had happened and it had come into his hands coincidentally. He further explained that, in his past life, to combat against the Wyverians, a lot of people had revealed the lower levels of the family vision, including the potion-making art. As such, the only people who knew how to craft them were himself and the original writer, her. He added that the Bessus Marquis family had used all their money to support Arden, making them the only people they could trust. Jaren was confused, and so asked why Ethan had chosen his family. Ethan replied that 15 years ago, the Marquis family had helped them by supporting them with all their money during the war with the Wyverians, which is why they had been able to build up again. Ethan had stated that it was a funny thing how the two families who had bled from the war had lost power and were falling, while the insects who were hiding were feasting on the flesh of the fallen. He also mentioned that there were 7 months until he became the head, and he planned to take care of all the traitors before then. Ethan expected Marquis to help Arden once more. Jaren was surprised by this, thinking to himself that this was someone who had woken up after 10 years, yet the powers that the Archduke must face were not only the 10 collaterals, but also the 7 families in the kingdom who envied the Ardens for their honor and unprecedented immunity as the kingdom's guardians. The 7 families of the kingdom supporting the 10 collaterals to help them consume the Ardens was already a well-known truth. Jaren was hesitant to give an answer to Ethan because of the odds that he would face if he allied himself with the Archduke. Ethan then told him that he understood why he was considering the offer, and that it was not a bad deal for him. Ethan then suddenly cut his hand, leaving Jaren shocked. Ethan assured him that it was just a simple product demonstration, and that the special potion's efficacy was similar to a low-rank potion, but the price to make it was only 10% of a regular potion. Jaren could not believe that it only took 10% to make, but he would need to calculate the ratio of herbs and fermentation time very accurately. Ethan then told him that he knew other crafting recipes besides the potion he had demonstrated, and that if Jaren accepted the offer he would give all the items he was going to sell to him free of cost. He said that Jaren would only have to pick now. Jaren accepted the solo contract offer, thinking that it was better to partner up with the Archduke instead of watching his family's reputation fall even further. Hans reported to Ethan that the Baron had broken the limit on the number of soldiers and the Red Scorpion were being assigned all over the city by the Baron. The maximum allowed tax rate was being used and the Baron was using the organization to exploit the citizens, calling it a protection. Ethan expressed his anger, stating that the Baron was threatening the land with people he had hired and taking protection money. He then asked Hans to hand him the document, inquiring as to who managed the taxes on the lower town. Hans replied to him, saying that the one managing the taxes was semi-noble Heims, a close confidant to Baron Kargas. Upon learning the whereabouts of Heims, they immediately set out. Ethan thought that it would take 4 months to take down Baron Kargas' family, but it was too long after meeting the Fire Monarch. He intended to destroy Heims first. Somewhere in Barrows, Heims was with his escorts collecting taxes, when an old man who was the custom officer approached him. He told Heims that they were missing a little money. Heims was enraged that the chief couldn't pay the taxes in full, brazenly telling the old man that they had taken down the Red Scorpion, though the old man knew the truth. Ethan and Hans arrived at the small village, with Hans yelling and pointing to the person, informing Ethan that he was the tax collector. Ethan released a murderous intent towards the tax collector and his companions. The escort knight that was accompanying the tax collector felt an unknown mana coming from Ethan. He thought that Ethan definitely had a small amount of mana, but the pressure Ethan had was extraordinary. Heims ordered the knight to do something. The escort knight told Ethan to stop, saying he would punish him for obstruction of justice of the Baron family. Ethan pulled out his sword, declaring that they were outrageous for plundering the village. Ethan then made his move, jumping towards the knight. The knight could not react in time because of Ethan's speed. The knight released his mana, thinking that Ethan's trajectory was simple and all he had to do was defend and counterattack. but what the knight did not anticipate was Ethan stopping his attack in the middle. The knight was surprised that Ethan stopped and changed his attack trajectory. He defeated the knight in a single hit. The tax collector and the soldiers were shocked by this. Himes ordered them to attack Ethan, but Hans told them that it was useless, informing them that the man was the Archduke and ordering them to drop their weapons. The soldiers complied. At Morocco town, in Himes' mansion, Ethan and Hans were with the tax collector. Himes stated that Baron Kargas had ordered him to collect more taxes. All the transaction history was written in the private account book they had kept. He had collected another evidence of the Baron's misdoings. The Baron was talking to someone, learning from their conversation that the other families were ready to abandon him as bait. He was infuriated. At the same time, a letter came, the contents being about the tax collection. The Baron did not have any other options left, so he decided to invite the Archduke to the Baron mansion to meet him personally, now considering him a strong enemy. Up next on Ethan's journey to restore his family's former glory, he will face an epic battle against Baron Kargas and his minions. Can he succeed in vanquishing his foe and reclaiming his family's glory? Tune in to find out. If you want part 3, leave a comment, part 3.